I have a feeling that traffic is bad for some people. Probably why some people are late, but I'm going to start anyways. Well, at least I have a handout, so I'll give the handout. Just an extra reading here, just 2 pages. It has to do with war, and it's a reading from the Bible. And the Bible is an old book and has a lot of old material in it, and it has some rules for war in this book called the Book of Deuteronomy. And these rules for war are some of the oldest rules that we know of or we have from human literature. So I thought it would be something interesting to read, and I'm not going to talk about it tonight. I don't think I will, but it's something I'll talk about next week when I start talking about war and just war and stuff like that. So I'll hand this out. Hopefully, I don't want to make it sound like I'm blaming anyone, because I know that there is a lot of traffic a lot of times. Our graduates are excited. Everybody coming? No? I mean, I'll talk more about it next week when next week when I talk about war. But just so that when you read it, you know what's going on. The rules are spread across different chapters in the book. So the main section of rules are found in chapter 20 of this book called the Book of Deuteronomy. So Deuteronomy chapter 20. If you turn on to the second page, then you've got some various other rules that are just kind of thrown in. It's not systematic. You can say it's like, it's not like there's one whole section that gives all the rules on war. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. I can talk more about that next week. But so you have a section in Deuteronomy chapter 21, which is on what happens if you go to war and you see, a pretty woman amongst the people you've enslaved. Can you marry her or not? That's a question that the Bible decides it needs to answer. When you're in camp, chapter 23, there are some verses about when you're in camp during warfare, what kind of decorum, what kind of cleanliness there needs to be in the camp amongst the men. And then there's one law in chapter 24 about married men fighting or not fighting in war. But I'll talk more about it next week. But I just wanted to go over it so nothing's confusing. If there is anything confusing about it, just let me know, and I'll explain it. Try to explain it, I should say. Okay, so let's see. Who are we waiting for? Did I miss? I'm sorry. Just make sure I have everybody here. Mr. Diaz is here. Check. Philistine. Check. Yes, Philistine. Milich. Check. Mr. Pay. Check. Marquez. Check. Seek. Check. And Miss Link. Hello, Miss Link. So we're reading for some other people. Now I will dismiss this. Whoops. Come on. I hate cell phones. I hate these lock screens. Okay, I guess I can. Well, I'll leave that alone. All right. Here's just an extra reading for next week that I handed out. Give me a chance. Just an extra reading. And remember, we do not have class next week because Thursday is the holiday of Thanksgiving. And since we won't be meeting, I have to do this now. So I got some candy corn from the store, which I guess is the closest thing you can get for Thanksgiving is candy corn. So, and I don't think it's just pure like sugar. It's like nothing healthy at all. And it's made in a peanut-free factory. So you should be okay. I don't have any buckets or things with, turkey, but anyways, imagine. So happy Thanksgiving. Have a good time. Enjoy yourself. Candy corn? Let me know. Hey. Sir. Happy Thanksgiving, sir. Just a little bit? There you go. Yeah, I know, because you have to remember it is pure sugar and like corn syrup. It's like not, well, I'm here, sir. So let me just Not too much? Well, you tell me. You don't want any? Okay. 91? No, I don't like it. Oh, you don't like candy corn? Well, I can understand that. It's quite sweet. I'll take one. All right. Where are we? This. Hopefully you've seen that I posted an announcement. In the announcements, I posted about the paper number 3. So remember that it is not required. It's only an extra credit. If you want to do it, good. If you do not want to do it, that's fine. It will not hurt your grade. But if you do it, then you might possibly get 20 extra points. And I changed the points total, so I posted that in the announcement so you know. And if you're following, I have been try to upload them quickly, but sometimes I forget and it takes me a day or two. But you do know that I am uploading the YouTube, or I am uploading the things to YouTube. Okay, good. I did notice, and I guess that's just the way it's going to be, because this is now quiz 4, that still most people have, and I'm not pointing any fingers, are waiting until the bitter end to do the quiz. I understand, but make sure you get it done, okay? Because it is due tomorrow night. Okay. And for paper number 3, as an extra credit, I have put a link or a module, I guess they call it, in Blackboard already where all the papers are so that you can upload your paper when you want. I thought that, I'd give it until December 5th just so you don't have to do it over. It's not something you're doing over the Thanksgiving holiday. Okay, so that was my thinking with putting it on December 5th. Okay, now back to Christopher Hitchens. Just, maybe briefly, but there are some comments I still wanted to make about what I was saying about Christopher Hitchens' arguments. And I was on this PowerPoint slide. Why am I doing that? Okay, this one. And I was talking about some of the people that he talked about in his interview as rationalists, as people who should know things about the world. And I guess my point was just trying to show that yeah, they knew, obviously, Benedict Spinoza lived in God bless you, Benedict Spinoza, unless that was a cough, then still, God bless you. Benedict Spinoza, who lived in the 1600s, died in 1677. I talked about him. What's his name? Christopher Hitchens also mentions Thomas Jefferson, who was the 3rd president of the United States. And when did he die? 1826 he died. 1826. He also mentions this American, also kind of a polemicist, Thomas Paine, who wrote a lot of pamphlets and advocated for the American Revolution, for separating from Britain. When did Thomas Paine die? He died in 1809. So 1809, and I already mentioned Benedict Spinoza. I think I wrote it up here, but what did I say, 1677? Kind of a spread from 1677 to the 1800s. But anyway, so 1677, 1826, 1809. I mean, the argument that Hitchens makes is really not a very good one. I mean, it's really kind of bad, because if you look at the dates of his own people, and he talked about germ theory, so I kind of emphasized that in my response to him, because he brings up the point. In all fairness, if he's going to bring up germ theory, then he needs to be able to defend his argument. Not anymore, because he's dead, may he rest in peace, but at the time he should have been able to defend it. He should have known better, that germ theory dates from the modern germ theory of knowing about bacteria and how they work and how they make people sick and how they bring decay to physical items like food, was only worked out in the 1850s by Louis Pasteur. I mentioned Pasteur last time. It's in the 1850s that this man, Louis Pasteur, started experiments where, he figured out that if he put a liquid, I forget what kind of liquid it is. It might have been like a chicken broth or something, and he put it in, I don't know what scientists call it, but it was like a glass bowl with a long glass opening, okay? And he left it, and he did two things. He had one which he left. He just left this kind of broth, protein broth. I want to say chicken broth, but it was a kind of protein broth. And then he had the same kind of thing, a protein broth in the same kind of glass bowl with a long spigot on it, but he boiled it. He boiled it and he left it. I think the reason for the long glass spigot was so that air could not get back in and possibly contaminate it. And so what did he find? Well, he found that bacteria was growing in the protein broth that he had not boiled, and the broth that he had brought to a boil and set to boil for a period of time did not have any growth of bacteria. And he reasoned, his reasoning for why that was because boiling killed the bacteria, which of course kind of know to be right. Yeah, go ahead.
It says that he spoiled beer, wine, and milk.
Oh, okay. Beer, wine, and milk. Spoil it. Okay, good. So I'm not right about the protein broth.
Beer, wine, and milk.
Okay. Oh, milk. Excuse me. So milk. Knew it was something that could spoil. It wasn't just ordinary water. So thank you for correcting me on that. And I should give you a point for that. All right, so that was his theory. His theory was that from what he observed, it seemed that boiling did something to the germs. It neutralized them so that the food stuff, whatever it was, did not spoil. That doesn't mean that the food won't eventually spoil, which food eventually will, because there's still bacteria in the air that can get to it. And that's how we get our process of what we call pasteurization, this whole process where you can boil a liquid like they do with milk, bring it up to a boil for a period of time, and they do this with other things like orange juice and whatnot, in order to kill the germs so that we won't get sick from eating it, or from drinking it, I should say. 1850s. Well, definitely cuts out Spinoza for knowing that. And it cuts out Thomas Paine pretty clearly. And even Thomas Jefferson, even though it's 1826, no. He's about 30 years, 3 decades off of that. Hitchens also talks about, I mentioned germ theory. But Hitchens also talks about how the world works, and he talks about knowing about, the sun is not moving through the sky, the sun is actually stationary. Okay, so astronomy. So granted, Aquinas and people like this man Thomas Aquinas, who lived in the 1200s, did not know about how astronomy worked, but neither did his rationalist heroes either. Again, Jefferson, Spinoza, Jefferson, Paine, you see when they died, they didn't know about black holes. They didn't know that we lived in a galaxy. They knew probably that we lived in a solar system, okay, because Hitchens mentions the Earth going around the sun. But they didn't know that we were in a solar system that was part of a larger body called the galaxy with a black hole at the center of it. In fact, we didn't even know. I mean, black holes were a theory until the end of the last century. I mean, it was a very solid theory. It seemed to explain a lot of things, but up until 1998, we weren't even able to see the black hole at the center of our galaxy. But in 1998, through the way that stars were moving within the center of our galaxy, astronomers were able to infer, not prove, just simply infer that there might be a black hole there. This was in 1998. And they still directly couldn't see it. They were just assuming it must be there because that seemed to be the only explanation for why the stars at the center of the Milky Way were moving the way they were. To make a long story short, it was not until 2019 that we got an actual image that astronomers were able to actually produce an image. Why? Because the telescopes weren't good enough before that. We didn't have good enough telescopes. They put stuff like the Hubble telescope, which is now, I remember when they first sent it up there, and now the Hubble telescope is too old. They have another one up there called the James something or other. I forget the name of it. Anyways, it was in the news in the last month or so, but I forget the name of it. But they put a new one up there that's better than Hubble, that takes clearer pictures and can see things better. But it wasn't until they were able to put telescopes up into space where there was no atmosphere, like the Earth atmosphere here on Earth with our telescopes, that they could see things a lot more clearly, and they were able to take this image, and even still it's a grainy kind of blurry image of a black hole, not of our galaxy. It's of the Messier 87 galaxy, which is, I forget how many millions of light years away. It's nowhere near us. It's very, very far away. That was in 2019 that they were able to take this picture of this black hole in another galaxy. Messier 87 is what it's called. Well, what about our galaxy, the Milky Way? Yes, we actually have been able to take a picture of our black hole in the last, I want to say 5 years. Sagittarius A star is what it's called. It's called Sagittarius A with a star, a little asterisk at the end. I wrote it down. 2 T's in Sagittarius. Sagittarius A star. That is our black hole. But up until, I would say, the last 5 years, we have not had a picture of it, but now we do. But I didn't want to use that picture because that's not the first picture we have of a black hole. So we got germs, we got black holes. I mean, a lot of things. I threw in Mount Kilimanjaro just because it sounded exotic. I don't know why. It just popped into my head. I said, "Oh yeah, Mount Kilimanjaro." So I threw that in there. This huge mountain. It's the highest point on the continent of Africa, and there's a picture of it. Down here you have the hot savanna, and then up there you have a snow-capped mountain. Actually, it's a huge volcano, apparently. former volcano. I don't think it's still active anymore. Well, I mean, this huge mountain, which of course Africans knew about, Europeans did not. The first European to actually cite this mountain, Mount Kilimanjaro, was in 1848. Kilimanjaro is the name of the mountain. Don't ask me who it was. I can look it up if I need to. Or if someone is quick on her computer. No, anyway. I mean, I could throw out other things, like the continent of Australia. You've all heard of Australia? You know, well, if you were living in the... Hey, ladies. How are you doing?
Could be better, but we're awesome.
Okay, good. Okay. Okay, so I'll put this aside for now. What was I talking about? Australia, just to throw this... I mean, Spinoza didn't. Certainly Spinoza. Jefferson and... I don't know if Paine might have been too early for him, but Jefferson and Paine could possibly have known about this new continent. But it wasn't until the 1700s that the whole continent of Australia was discovered by, I believe it was a Dutch ship. And they disembarked, they looked at it, it looked like a big desert to them, and they had no interest in it. And then later on, the British came. And it eventually became a part of the British Empire, British colonial, part of the British colonial empire. But they didn't know, I mean, this thing was there, it wasn't there. So I guess my point is that you can't be blamed for what you cannot possibly know. Okay? Thomas Aquinas and Augustine, they were religious men. They were also searching for the truth, just like these men were. Okay? And could include Pasteur in this as well, because Pasteur didn't know about black holes either. But you can't blame people for not knowing how the world works when they have no possibility of knowing that. In fact, obviously, we know better how the world works, but we know we don't know it all. I hope we don't. I hope we don't think that everything has now been decided and there's nothing more to discover. So why should I be listened to, or any one of us in this room be listened to on any issue, if someone could say 50 years from now, 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, well, she didn't know about this, that we all know is true now. Okay, it's not much of an argument for me. I will grant Hitchens that I think he doesn't really make this argument, but I think he's trying to make this argument. Before I forget, I'll give the handout. This is just an extra reading for next week. You're welcome. From the Bible. But, I will grant him that religion is not the best explanation for everything. And religion is probably not the best explanation for how the world works. This is maybe, as a religious person, I think that I can make this mistake, and maybe some of people who believe in religion can make this mistake a lot. They think that religion is the best explanation, more so than science, for how the world works. I don't think that's the role of religion or what religion is good at. I don't think that's what it's designed for. I don't think religion is the place to look for the mechanism of the universe. And so I would agree with Hitchens that in the case of looking for how the universe works, its mechanism, we rightly look to the natural sciences. And I think just by using the natural sciences, by their existence and what people have been able to do with the natural sciences, as opposed to, say, religious explanations, the natural sciences have shown that they often give the best explanation for how the world works. They're not so good, I would say, at giving purpose or meaning. And I think even scientists would admit that. If you ask, you're in physics class and you're like, well, what does all of this mean? That's not really a question you would ask in physics class. You learn the theorems, you learn the equations, you learn, how stuff works in the physical universe. But it's Remember, it's materialistic. It's focused on the world is material, and that's all that a physicist is concerned about. He or she is not concerned about higher questions like, well, what's the purpose of the material? Why does it exist in the first place? Does it have a reason for even existing, a purpose or a meaning? And that's where I think religion comes in. Religion is perhaps best at giving meaning and purpose, and it's better at explaining what the world is. So just because religion doesn't fit narrowly into Hitchens' view of what gives meaning, which for him would be natural science, I don't think it's a form of ignorance. I think it's another form of knowledge. And knowledge which needs humility. I mean, like any kind of knowledge, religion needs to know what it doesn't know. Just like science needs to know what it doesn't know. And it doesn't always do that. I mean, before speaking of physics and the natural world, I forgot. There was a period of time, happy Thanksgiving, ladies. That's some candy corn, if you're interested. You okay? You are. Should I take another one?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. All right, my last one. Anywho, by the end of the 1800s, believe it or not, if you read in the history of science, and I dabble a little bit, I'm not an expert, but I like reading about it, and I read things, but like by the end of the 1800s and into the early 1900s, physicists thought they had figured it all out. They thought they knew exactly how the world worked. They really thought there was nothing more to learn. All they had to do was kind of fine-tune the laws that they knew. So they had various laws that were established by this man, Isaac Newton, who I think also lived in the 1600s, but don't quote me on that. I'd have to look up his dates. But he was an Englishman and very genius. And he had helped, through his own thinking and writing, he was able to establish certain laws of the physical world that were always the same and acted always the same everywhere throughout the universe. Oh, yes. They thought it was all figured out. And then came along an Austrian gentleman named, he was Austrian. He worked in Switzerland. Yes, that's right. He worked later in Switzerland. But Austrian gentleman named Albert Einstein, who blew up the whole idea. He showed that actually the physical laws that we believe are normal and are universal here on planet Earth are not so normal and universal as we thought. And in certain places of the universe, the physical laws don't act the same under certain conditions. So science also needs its own form of humility. So religion is just another form of knowledge. Whether someone thinks it's a good form of knowledge or it's a useful form, well, that's another debate and a question to have. I think it is useful. So knowing requires being willing to admit not knowing, and that I think applies to both religion and science. One final point for Hitchens that he mentions, like, Anderson Cooper asks him, well, do you give any credit to religion for anything? Is there any good to religion? And Hitchens replies that, yeah, cultural things. Gothic architecture, which is a form of architecture that usually people associate it with France. So it's called Gothic because I guess the ancient Goths were in France at one time. But he mentions poetry, the poetry of this man, John Donne, an Englishman. John Donne was an Englishman. See, I can be a poet too. I wonder if somewhere along the line we were related, because my last name is Dunn too, even though he spells his differently. I think it's just a matter of spelling, so somewhere along the way, John Dunn and I must be related. John Dunn. Like that O. Fuller O here. There we go. Okay, good. Those are cultural things. But then, and this is where we get to religion and violence. There's a saying, turnabout is fair play. I mean, if you're going to argue in a certain way, it's okay for me to turn the tables on your argument and use it against you, if that's the base, and that's fair. Because if you're going to use a certain viewpoint, I can use that viewpoint and then say, well, wait a second, your own viewpoint contradicts what you're trying to argue. So he says that, or he gives religion credit for cultural achievements. They're achievements of culture. So they're not, in a way, true achievements. They're just things that religion gave to culture, like poetry or how to build buildings, architecture, and music. He mentions music. He says he doesn't like devotional painting. Okay, fine. But he does, so music, poetry, architecture, he mentions those. But if the good achievement apparently is a good thing, if the good things are cultural, then what about the bad stuff? Like violence, like the wars of religion, the Inquisition, the Crusades, things that people bring up all the time as bad things that religion has done. Can't those also be attributed to cultural then? Can't we just say, well, that's not really religion. That was the culture religion was in. That was its milieu, its surroundings in which it was in. But it might not be to blame itself. Because Hitchens doesn't seem to accept that. He wants to blame religion for not keeping itself to itself, for being prone to violence. But why are those not cultural? Why does he give it credit when it's a matter of giving credit? He doesn't want to do that. He wants to kind of push it off to something else. Well, it can't be religion itself that's good, ever good for Hitchens. It has to be something else. But when religion is bad, it's always religion itself that's bad for Hitchens. Not flying around. Okay. All right. My discussion of, it says Dr. Dunn's discussion, but I don't know why I put that there. Anyway. All right. Now on to more. Now we're done with Hitchens, and I'm going to go more into, I guess, lecture stuff. I guess that's how I describe it. Stuff that I read and research that I did for the lecture. A lot of what I'm talking about comes from an article on violence in the Encyclopedia of Religion, and also I took some stuff from, what's her name? Buzard Weaver? Well, maybe actually only later. Okay, but a lot of what I'm giving you is from Fritz Graf. I've mentioned him before. He wrote an article on violence in the Encyclopedia of Religion, so I'm giving you some stuff from him. Fritz Graf, violence, Encyclopedia of Religion. According to Fritz Graf, in the Encyclopedia of Religion, he says, quote, "Religion is the most powerful symbolic system humans have developed." Excuse me. Religion is the most powerful symbolic system. That's a very interesting statement. I like that phrase. That defines religion in a very interesting way. That religion is a system of very... get out of here. speaking of being violent, I'm trying to kill this gnat, is a system that's full of these images, actions that we do, stories that are characterized by a density of meaning, you could say. Like the meaning kind of just weighs down on them. And maybe we don't know why, why a particular story speaks to a person or a particular song, but it does. And that does just in secular matters as well. You might hear a song from some singer and it really speaks to you and it speaks to your situation. And so maybe whenever you need to go to your good place, you always listen to this song. Or maybe when you're feeling sad, you always listen to this song and it speaks to you. Religion does that in a degree that just normal secular things don't. It taps into something that's within us. Our need for symbol. We need to express ourselves, and we can't express ourselves literally. Just the way, I don't know why, it's just the way we're made up. We have to draw things, we have to write things, we have to write poetry, make music, play games, all just to show what we're feeling and the meaning that we find in the universe. Even if it's just a transitory meaning, even if it's just a ball game, just a baseball game, okay, yeah. Seeing in the news that, what's his name, Aaron Judge, is that his name? Is going to maybe receive the MVP? He did, or do you think he will? Okay. It doesn't, the fact that he broke the record for home runs, it's not a transcendent value. I don't know if anyone on Mars cares, if there is anyone on Mars. I imagine that my cats don't care. That I can tell you, but I think cats don't care about anything. Unless there's an empty food dish, then they care very much. And I should also say a close number 2 is if the litter box hasn't been cleaned in a while. Then that's like, DEFCON 4. Which reminds me, I have a project to do when I go home. Anyways, but religion does. Events that you might look at something and, that's just an event, people doing things. But when it has a religious flavor to them, it has a sort of transcendence that it matters at the time, but it also matters almost forever for people. So religion is essentially important to how human beings view themselves and the world. At least it has been. Maybe not so much today. We live in a culture which is largely secularist, largely not anti-religion, but pretty much not religious. It's not overt. It's not like you drive down the street and you see statues of the Virgin Mary on the side of the road, or statues of a god or goddess or something, as you would do if you go to certain places in Europe. I remember when I was in Germany, I traveled there with my high school twice. And I remember one time, I forget which city we were in Germany, but I was just walking along, and all of a sudden, there's a little, right there on the side of the road, a little shrine with a cross, a crucifix, with Jesus nailed to the cross for people to, and it wasn't new. It had looked like it was old, but you would see that in some parts of Germany where they would have statues of like Mary, the mother of Jesus, or the cross, Jesus on the cross, where people, and sometimes you'd see people stop and, they say a little prayer or something and make the sign of the cross. If you were in India, you'd see it all over the place. You'd see these, I've never been to India, but I've seen pictures. But, you see these pictures of gods and demons and all sorts of things all over the place. And of course, you see the holy men on street corners and, just out in nature doing their thing. They're standing there, doing their yoga thing all day, every day, and sometimes, hopefully they cover themselves up, but not always. because for some reason nudity is a thing in Hinduism, in some groups of Hinduism. So, but they have ashes all smeared all over their head which will tell you which god they follow, and their hair will be all long and unclean. Apparently, they're not supposed to wash it, I think, or at least for some of the groups. But they're there. They're all over the place. It's a normal part of Indian life. Not so much for us. But for a lot of people, whether they practice or not, religion is still essentially important to their view of the world. And so if religion, and even if not now in America in 2022, certainly if you go back a century, or not even a century, 50 years, you could find that people were very religious. Whether they really believed in it or not is another question, but it was not uncommon for a lot of people to go to church. I say church because this was largely a Christian country, so that's where most people will be going. But you have people going to synagogues as well, obviously, if you're Jewish, or a mosque if you're a Muslim. But since, given the context of the United States, most people were going to a church of some sort, so it mattered. So religion, it makes sense that religion should pervade, should kind of diffuse itself into every aspect of human conduct, even violent conduct. Even violent conduct. Would a person fight to preserve this or defend this symbolical system? And so it should not be surprising that throughout history, religion and violence have been in close contact. Just about every religion on the planet has some sort of rules or laws or something to do with violence. Not that they're actively telling people to go out and commit violence. Usually it's to regulate it, to kind of rein it in, to give it boundaries. So when it does happen, it doesn't go people don't go crazy. It's not chaotic violence. But just about every religion, even religions that you might think is completely peaceful, like Buddhism. But then again, if you read, what did I get? I gave you the article on Buddhist terror, yes? So there's that. But that's a modern thing. You could say, well, that's modern. That's just that's in recent times that this guy in Myanmar, or Burma is another name for the country. It depends on, they keep changing the name of the country. Sometimes they want to be called Myanmar. Other times they say Burma's okay. So I'll give you both. When I grew up, it was called Burma. Now I think it's back to Myanmar, or Myanmar. If you listen to the talking heads on the news, they say Myanmar. What's his name? Hold on a second, his name escapes me. I tried a mnemonic device to try and help myself remember his name, but obviously it didn't work. Oh, here we go. Where are you, sir? Well, I see your picture, but I need to get your name. Wirathu. Wirathu. How was I remembering that? He just goes by the name of Wirathu. Wirathu! Wirathu! Hopefully that will remember. Keep it in the brain. Wirathu. Who is a Buddhist monk. Now, you wouldn't normally associate Buddhism with hatred or violence towards other people, but yeah, this monk Wirathu is very clear that yes, in order to defend the Buddhist community, violence might be necessary. Now, according to Graff in his article for the Encyclopedia of Religion, a detailed history of the contact between religion and violence has not been written yet. So not a detailed history, but there has been a lot of research into individual episodes. People write articles, maybe even books about individual episodes where violence and religion come together, which is an interesting comment, because if a detailed history has not been written, how do people keep going around saying that, well, it's so clear that religion is violent? It's so clear, as Stephen Kimball says in his book, I didn't have you read, but it was mentioned in the talk by, what's his name, Kavanaugh. I showed you his talk, Kavanaugh's talk. He quotes from this man, Stephen Kimball, who opens his book, When Religion Becomes Evil, I think is the title. And the first statement of the book is basically, all the wars of, all the violence in the world and the history of the world has been caused by religion, is basically what he says. Actually, I might have the quotation here, if I remember. Do I have the quotation? Actually, no. But all the wars, he blames all the wars that have ever been in the history of humanity, have been mostly religious for this guy, Stephen Kimball. Well, how can that be the case when no one has really compiled all the wars in human history to see, which were political wars, which were purely religious wars? Now, I do believe there have been wars that were purely religious. There were, for example, the wars of religion that occurred in the 1600s. And you can have violence that is purely religious. The Inquisition, which was a court system that was used to try people, bring people to trial who were considered heretics. They were wrong-believing Christians, and so they had to be punished. Okay, that's purely religious. And they used torture, and if the person was found to be a heretic, they would give the person over to the state for execution. That's purely religious. I'm not going to say that, that's political violence or whatever. No. That's religion being violent. But I do question when people make such sweeping statements when we really don't seem to have all the facts. Many myths and stories in religion view violent acts positively. They accept, in a lot of religions, in their stories, their mythology, violence is simply accepted and is seen as kind of a necessary part of the natural world. Okay, which makes sense to me. I mean, if you see fire burning down a forest, well, that's violent. That's an act of violence. Whose act of violence it is, I don't know. Not human beings. If it's a lightning bolt that strikes the ground and sets a tree on fire and starts a whole forest fire, well, you can't blame me for that. Even though I'm a Christian, I didn't do it. The Christians did it. They burned down our forest. Their God called down a firebolt. Oh. No, it's nature. It happens. These things happen. If a big piece of ice falls into the ocean and it makes the ocean rise and there's a tidal wave and the tidal wave reaches land and destroys all the trees and maybe people who are there who have decided to build a home there, but destroys all the trees and the animals and the sand on the beaches. Is that God's fault? Did religion do that? No, it happened. There's violence in nature. Remember I talked about this when I talked about what is violence. Violence seems to be a part of the cosmos. So it's not surprising that human beings see this and they think, well, I guess violence is a necessary part of the natural world. And so it gets into their stories, the religious stories that they tell about where did the world come from. And sometimes those stories are violent. Sometimes those stories concern the foundation of the whole order of the cosmos. So, for example, this is just one example. And do I give it here on the next slide? Whoops. Come on, don't do me like that. Yeah. To just give a couple examples. One from probably you recognize Christianity. You probably don't recognize the other religion, which is Babylonian religion, an ancient religion. I have to figure out how much of the story I'm going to tell you. Well, I'll try to give you the very brief version that I can. I'll write the names anyways, just in case. Tiamat is a goddess. She's the goddess of salt water. And her husband, Apsu, is the god of fresh water. And Marduk, I'll get to in a second. In ancient Babylon, which is in modern-day Iraq, I'll show you where Iraq is on the map. Don't worry about my emails. There's nothing I'm ashamed of or that should scandalize you. Don't worry. I live a boring life. It's not like I'm Taylor Swift or something. Starting to see her now in all these commercials, you know. Like, famous woman. Nope. Go out. Dr. Dunn. Okay, it's going to take a moment because I'm using it through my phone. Okay, so we go all the way over here. Across northern Africa. So I'll go out some more. Here we go. So if we go out further, we see the world here. We're over here in Teaneck, New Jersey. But if you go across the Atlantic and across Europe and across northern Africa, you'll come to the Middle East, what's called the Middle East. And you'll see, almost in the middle of the Middle East, this country called Iraq. And ancient Iraq, there are many ancient civilizations. As far as we can tell from archaeology, the oldest civilizations in human history, we started here in this area of the world. And right down here in the south was, I guess you could call it an empire, but certainly a civilization called the Babylonian civilization or the Babylonian Empire. I know it became an empire later. Well, I'll say the Babylonian civilization. And and I think its capital was called Babylon. In fact, let me just search for that. Maybe I can get an exact pinpoint of where Babylon was. Yeah, Babylon, capital city. Let's look at the map. There we go. Wikipedia. Oh, there we go. Babylonia. Okay. So you can see the map when it comes up. You see the map? So you can see it within the context of where Iraq is. You see that? And then there's the sea, what is the Gulf is that? Is that the Persian Gulf? Might be the Persian Gulf. Anyways. And so at the southern portion is where Babylon is. So just where I was showing you down here in this area was ancient Babylon. Anywho, a great civilization, old civilization. Is that bothering you? Do you want me to close the door or are we okay? Okay? No one says nothing? Okay. I'll assume everything's okay. Copacetic. In the story of how the world came about, their creation story, it's full of violence. I mean, it's a war. Creation starts with a war. Before this war, you have salt water and fresh water, which is, again, people weren't stupid. People were observant. Okay, just because they didn't know really how the world worked didn't mean they were dumb. They knew that there was fresh water and salt water, and they knew that this water was in oceans and in lakes, but they also knew that the water came down from above, from the heavens. So you had water that seemed to come up from below in their wells and stuff like that. If you dug down deep enough, you'd hit the water table and you get water, They knew that there were oceans and lakes, and they knew that there was rain. So for them, it made perfectly logical sense that the whole world should be surrounded by water. Otherwise, where is it all coming from? It's coming from below. It's on the earth itself. It's coming from above. Where's it all coming from? It must be surrounding everything. And they also knew, because they could taste it, that some of it was salty and
not good to drink, and some of it was you could drink it all day and you'd never get fat. Well, actually, you can't. You can't drink it all day. You know, you can get drunk from water. Did you know that? You can actually get inebriated from water. Didn't know that. Because it's the process. What happens is if you drink too much, even if you drink too much water, it gets into your bloodstream and there's not enough oxygen. It pushes out. I'm not a medical person, so I'm using words that make sense to this brain up here. It kind of like pushes out the oxygen, so there's not enough oxygen. How do I know this? Because a lady died from it. It was in the news. Apparently they had a contest to win a car. I think it was to win an automobile. And the contest was that you had to drink tons of water, but you couldn't go to the bathroom. And the person who lasted, Ms. Miller, it's one of those, dumb American things. Whoever lasted the longest without going to the bathroom, wetting himself or herself, won the car. And this lady died from it. She went into shock because there was little to no oxygen in her blood. She was inebriated. So it can happen not just from alcohol. So people notice these things, even ancient people, and so they made gods out of them. You had the god of the salt water, Tiamat, who was female, and the male god who was freshwater. Because, of course, they also noticed that things are also male and female. There's this dualism, two-ness to the world. So freshwater, saltwater. So just like male and female, night and day, okay, light and darkness, hot and cold. Okay, so they put these two together and you get a male god and a female god who mix together. They mix, but they don't become one another because you still have fresh water and salt water. Well, anyways, Tiamat is kind of a water monster. She's kind of a dragon, a weird kind of dragon figure. Kind of like the description, and I read this recently. I'm hoping I'm remembering it correctly, but she's like let's just say she's a water monster. Just leave it at that, okay? She's think of a scary kind of snake-like water monster, or something like a dragon, if that helps, because I think she has legs, and snakes don't have legs. And she also has udders like a cow, and snakes don't have udders like a cow, okay? But she's a water monster. Anyways, she and Apsu have all these children, little gods and goddesses, their children, who are gods like them. But they're making so much noise, the young gods, they're making so much noise that Apsu wants to get rid of them. He wants to basically destroy them all or just get rid of them. And they find out about it. The young gods and goddesses find out about it. And so they decide to kill their father. So they kill Apsu. They put him away, which ends up in him being dead, basically. Which is kind of interesting because if you think about it, think of Freud's idea of where religion came from. Remember the primal horde and these eight sons kill their father to get the wives? Except in this case, they're not killing Apsu because they want Tiamat. They're killing Apsu because they want to survive. They don't want to die. So they do that. Once Tiamat mourns Apsu's death, but she doesn't do anything about it. But eventually, another god called Kingu tells her, Tiamat, you really need to get revenge on the other gods because of what they did to your husband. And so she decides to do that. And so there's a war. Now, the young gods are scared to death because Tiamat is very powerful and will probably kill them all, destroy them. So they're and when it comes to gods in these kind of mythologies, they never really die. They die, but it's kind of like a god death. They die, but they become something else. But anyways, they're still afraid of being killed and what Tiamat will do to them. So they elect this guy, Marduk, who is a really powerful god. He's like, he's immense. He's apparently huge. So he's like very muscular and big and powerful. And so they make Marduk the captain of their army really the only person basically, to go kill Tiamat, to fight her in battle, which he does, and he wins. He shoots an arrow down her open mouth, Tiamat's open mouth, into her heart and kills her. And then what he does with Tiamat is he cuts her in two, and he takes the top portion and he makes the sky. He pushes it up, so is pushing all the waters out of the way and makes the sky. And he uses the bottom portion to make the earth. And the gods who fought against him on the side of Tiamat, he kind of enslaves them. They now have to take care of this heaven and earth that he's created. They have to, clean up the garbage and stuff like that. While Marduk's one condition is, you have to make me the supreme god. You have to give me all power and authority, which the other gods say, okay, we will, which they do. So Marduk is the main god who is worshipped in Babylon. So the story is kind of telling you about the origins of why they worship Marduk in Babylon, but that's a whole other thing. Anyways, what do we do with Kingu? Well, because the defeated gods don't want to work anymore, they find that it's too much work to keep the earth and the heavens under control and keep them cleaned up and keep them going. They beg Marduk, please, can we have something? So what he does is he kills Kingu, who was this god. I forget what his relationship is to Tiamat, but anyways, one of the gods, this god that got Tiamat to start the war in the first place. And so he makes, Marduk takes the blood of Kingu, whom he's killed, and takes some dirt and makes this little creature, which you call a man. Okay, he makes male and female. He makes men and women. And the humans now are kind of like the slaves. They will do the work that the defeated gods were supposed to do. They will take care of the earth and the heavens for the gods, so that the gods can rest. Some of you who, if you know your Bible, some of this might actually sound familiar to you. A God who creates like a roof in the sky and creates the land, who separates the waters, from above and below, who takes a little bit of dirt and blows life into it. And also this God rests on the seventh day from all the work. The Jews, that's kind of, that's the Jewish story, which is kind of similar in a lot of ways to this story. And there's a reason for that. Scholars think it's because the Jews were answering the story. They were saying, no, your story is wrong. It's not Marduk, it's our God. And our God is better. But that's, again, another cup of coffee for another class. Another type of course, not this one. So, in the creation story of Babylon, it's all about violence. It's a war. In Christianity, now getting Christianity, well, it's right there in your face. I mean, you have this God's Son hung on a cross, or hanged on a cross, I guess we should say, but I wonder if hanged is more appropriate or correct in English grammar. Okay? Jesus of Nazareth, considered to be, by Christians, many Christians, to be God's Son, to be divine himself, God-like himself. And God is his Father, and God lets his Son die as a victim in order to found a new world order based on his religion. So violence, again. Oh, that went quicker than I thought it would. Okay, let's take our 10-minute break. Okay. Here I am.
Are you ready to start?
Yeah. I'd be right there with him if I could.
Alrighty. Okie dokie. What I wanted to point out on this PowerPoint is that this picture is of Marduk. Okay, so before I forget, this is the guy I was talking about, Marduk, and this is apparently a snake. At least that's what it was described as for the picture, but it doesn't look to me like a snake with legs, and looks to me almost like kind of a dog-like figure, but whatever. Anyways, this is just an animal that's associated with Marduk, and this would be Tiamat. This would be a representation of Tiamat of the waters that, the salt water that he defeated, and there's a line drawn down the middle of it, which, according to the source I looked at, said this line is meant to indicate the separation that Marduk makes between the the heavens and the earth, or maybe it's I don't want to say that because it didn't say that. But this is the separation he makes when he separates Tiamat into the heavens and the earth. He splits her in two. Okay, so this is Marduk wearing some rather heavy, large and perhaps heavy jewelry. Maybe that's because he's so powerful he can do that. And rather longish beard, etc. Okay. When we look at violence from the perspective of the monotheistic religions and polytheistic religions, what can we say? Just a few things to say about each, because there is a distinction in how each one kind of handles violence. Monotheism means the belief in one God. Monos means one, single. So that's what monotheism means. Polytheism comes from the Greek polus, which means many. Polus. So polytheistic, many gods. There is more than one God. Doesn't necessarily mean you worship all of them. In some forms of polytheism, there's a main god that everyone worships, but there are lesser gods and goddesses that people worship. And nevertheless, polytheism. So questions about violence arise for each one. Each one kind of handles it differently. And questions of violence in the monotheistic religions, say Judaism, Christianity, Islam, are more complicated and controversial. Why? Well, because in a monotheistic religion and monotheistic systems, both areas, justice and war, the execution of justice but also the execution of war, are placed under one God. So one God is responsible for both, for punishing people under justice, but also for commanding war. It's one God's duty. So one God gets the responsibility, but also one God gets the blame. So it's not spread around as it is in monotheistic or polytheistic religions. Some scholars identify two issues with monotheistic religions that contribute to violence, to possible problems that can contribute to violence. These are characteristics of monotheistic faiths. One would be revelation, this concept of revelation, and another would be universalism. Probably should have given definitions for those, but I didn't. All right, well, I'll have to give them now. Revelation, basically what the word revelation means is an uncovering, to uncover something, to reveal. That's what it means in Latin, revelo, velo, to veil, like put a veil or a cover over something. And then when you revelo, you take it off, you uncover it. So revelation is the act of uncovering or revealing, act of uncovering or revealing, with the implication that you're revealing something that is hidden. Something unseen that people don't see, don't know. And universalism, well, that means everything, basically. Universus means everything in Latin. And it's the state of everything, of being everything, or the state of possessing everything, I guess you could say. State of possessing or I guess you could say possessing, or say covering everything, including everything. And if anyone wants like an extra credit point and wants to look up universalism, like in a dictionary online, maybe they have a better definition than I give for universalism. So these two ideas, revelation and universalism, the belief that the religion is revealing something, some hidden knowledge or some hidden fact, and universalism, that it is about everything. It wants to include everything under its umbrella. Oh, yes. Sorry, I got both of you. Miss Philistine? Okay, you first. Well, you'll both get the point. So let's... Okay, yes, that is true from a religious perspective. Good. It's not what I'm looking for. But it is, yes, there are if this were a purely religious studies course, yes, universalism means the belief that all people will eventually be saved. It also kind of goes hand in hand with the belief that there is no hell, or if there is a hell, that everyone will eventually be released from it and go into heaven. Okay, so that's good, Ms. Philistine. Okay, Ms. Link, what did you get?
I found that definition, and also loyalty to and concern for others without regard to national or other allegiances.
Okay.
The her definition and mine are the same thing.
Good. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's kind of getting at it. Yes. The concern for everything. So it includes, but a basic universus in Latin means everything. So I'll stick to what I gave you. I think that's, for my purposes, that serves the idea that I'm talking about here, and what what Fritz Graf means when he talks about it. Okay. It is these two characteristics that some critics think make monotheistic religions in particular potentially violent by nature. Why? Well, for revelation, it can conflict with people who claim that they have other truths or who challenge their truth. You know, revelation means that something has been uncovered, something that was hidden, so you are being brought into the full truth. Well, what do you do if someone else comes along and says, well, that's not the truth, I know what the truth is, and it's not your truth? Well, that can maybe bring up feelings of aggression towards that person. You need to fight in order to defend your truth that you've learned through revelation. So conflict. And universalism has a problem because since it wants to include everything, it sometimes can include missionary expansion. So you want to make everybody who's not part of your religion part of your religion. So you send out missionaries. You send people, which is what missionary means, someone who is sent. You send people out to proclaim your belief system and to maybe sometimes force them to believe in it, so that all universal, all the world is included in your belief system, in your revelation. Now, this is not inevitable. This is just what critics say. It's not inevitable that this will happen. I mean, a person can be confronted with another truth system and say, oh, well, we share the same truth then. You must have found the truth another way. Or they might, but the reaction doesn't have to necessarily be violent. It could be one of dialogue, like, okay, let's talk about it. Maybe I can convert you to my truth. But the beginning reaction does not necessarily have to be aggressive. You want to convince the person to your point of view. And if they are not convinced, then you can say, okay, well, go in the peace of God, or whatever. You don't have to hit, okay, I kill you now, you decided you don't agree with me. Or you could simply decide we're not going to be friends anymore, but I'm not going to kill you. I'm not going to do violence to you, but I'm not going to be with you anymore because we don't believe the same things. My point is there are other options. It's just like, the frustration aggression hypothesis. There are other options when your goal is frustrated. That violence is not necessarily the only option. For polytheistic religions, I don't know if I have this on a slide. Let me see here. Do I have it? Yeah, for polytheistic religions, violence is kind of spread out. It's not all centered in one god. And religions with many gods and goddesses, violence is regulated by usually specific deities. So, for example, Zeus, this god from Greek religion, is the god of justice. He's the protector of justice within society. Makes sure that things are done properly. That's what justice is, giving to each person what that person is due, what that person deserves, justice. So he protects justice, and he punishes those who violate justice. So that's his job. But warfare was typically given to the goddess, female god, Athena. Okay? You can even see she has a big shield. So that's part, the shield of war. That's part of her depiction in when people draw pictures of her or make statues of her. And she is the goddess of defensive wars. Okay? She's not the goddess of, I guess, all war, but wars that are wars of defense. That's her role. There is another god, and I'll mention him now. There is another god, and maybe he's on the next slide. Okay, we'll get to that slide in a second. There is another god called Ares, or Mars, who I don't have a picture of him here. Or maybe I do. I do have a picture of him, excuse me. Ares, or Mars. In Greek, it's Ares. And in, just so you know, in Latin, his name becomes Mars. He is the god of war. Who would like to read this? This is a quotation from an epic poem called, an epic poem is just a very long poem that tells usually a very complicated story. But the epic poem, the Iliad. I don't know if anyone has read this here in college or read it in high school. I read part 2 is called the Odyssey. I read the Odyssey in college. I've never read the Iliad. Frankly, I have no desire to. It's not enough time in the day for Greek poetry, ancient Greek poetry. Anyways, would anyone like to read this section? Is anyone interested? The whole thing, but this section of the epic poem, the Iliad. But let me get myself out of the way. Who's interested? Okay, I got you. I saw your hand first, so why don't you do it, Mr. Diaz? Or okay, no, Ms. Marquez.
No, I was just gonna do it, nobody else is gonna do it, but.
Back to you, Mr. Diaz.
No, you renegade, do not sit
Oh no, start from the beginning. Then Zeus.
Then Zeus the cloud gatherer looked sternly at Ares and said, "You renegade, do not sit by me in the fire. Most hateful to me are you of all the gods that dwell on Mount Olympus. You always love discord and wars and battles. Truly the spirit of your mother, Hera herself, is unbearable. Her cannot scarcely rule with words. Therefore, I deem that by prompting you are in this predicament. Yet I will no longer endure to see you in anguish, for you are my child, and to me your mother bore you. For you were born unto this violence by any other god. Long ago you would have been made lower than the sons of heaven."
Okay, thank you very much. So what's going on here? Well, basically, there's a battle in the Iliad. It's the Battle of Troy, if I remember correctly, the city called Troy. And in the midst of the battle, I mean, Ares is going about killing people and, inciting people to kill and is having all sorts of fun with that. And that's a statue of Ares, you see him with his sword. And he's the god of war, so he loves war and violence and death and bloodshed, the awful things of war. But somehow, and I did not read the whole story, so I don't know how he gets hurt, but he gets hurt. He gets injured, even though he's a god. Okay, the gods are kind of like human beings in some ways, just more powerful. Anyways, Ares gets hurt, and so he starts kind of whining and whimpering and crying, and he goes and he's going to sit down by his father, who is Zeus, the cloud gatherer. And Zeus says, "No, you're not. I don't want you sitting near me." And he tells you, "I hate you." This is his son he's talking to. "I hate you. You are most hateful to me of all the gods that dwell on Mount Olympus." They all live on this big mountain in Greece called Mount Olympus. Why? Because you love discord, wars, and battles. You love the bloodshed of war, which, from Zeus's perspective, even though he's the god of justice, he should not love this. War should not be something lovable. It is not a good thing. So even in this religion, this polytheistic religion, there's a recognition that violence is not a good thing. It's not normal. But for Ares, it is. He likes it, and that's why he is the most hateful of the gods. After that, when he says, "Truly the spirit of your mother Hera is unbearable. I can't control her," and that she's the one who prompted you to do this, to create so much bloodshed. Basically, what he's saying here is, you're just like your mother. I can't talk to your mother either. You can't get a word in edgewise. You're just like her. Another reason he doesn't like her. But I will help you. I will no longer endure you to see in anguish. I will help you because, you are the son, you are the child of my wife. She bore you to me. You're my kid. But if you had been born to another god, another father, Ares, then you would have been made lower than the sons of heaven. And what does that mean? He would have sent him down into hell, because the low place for the sons of heaven was this place, which was kind of like a hell. It was a place of, not really suffering, but it was a dark place under the earth, deep under the earth, where old previous gods who had been defeated by Zeus and his brothers and sisters were forced to live. Okay? It's called Tartarus. I'll just tell you the name just so you know. It's called Tartarus. It's just a place of darkness, and it's not a happy place. So no one wants to be there. But basically, I'd send you to hell. It's almost like we might say in, modern times, if a father said to his son, say, "Look, son, I brought you into this world. I'll take you out." It's kind of like saying that, I brought you in. You're my son, so I'll take care of you. But if you weren't my son, I'd send you down into the depths of hell, Ares, if I could. So there is this recognition, even in the polytheistic religions, that violence is not the norm. It's not really normal. Mr. Pei, aren't you going to eat your candy corn? Okay. Anyways, it's not normal, and it's to be hated. It has to be ritualized. Okay, so for rituals for instances of justice, executing justice in warfare, there are rituals. So, for example, just like in the court system, even today, there's a Bible, there's a religious book, or a Quran if you don't believe in the Bible. But there's a religious text that's used. Why? What if, even if you don't believe, even if you're an atheist, you're still asked to put your hand on this religious text, which means nothing to you, but to take an oath on it and to refer to a god. It was the same thing in the ancient world. I mean, as part of the legal system, if you had to serve in a court, there might be, there were religious ceremonies that accompanied the opening and closing of the court that you would have to participate in. So there were rituals. Warfare, sacrifices would be offered to the gods or goddesses to make sure that there would be success in warfare. But most importantly, that warfare would be done properly. Because if it were not done properly, then it would anger the gods, and the gods would punish you for that, for not having even fought a war properly. So religion comes in, yes, with violence, because here you have Zeus, the god who's a protector of justice. You have his wife Athena, or Hera, as she's called here, Athena, who is a goddess of defensive war. You have Ares, who is a god of war. So there's violence, but religion also is protective. It protects people from the violence. It sets rules and boundaries about how far you can go, because if you go too far, then you offend the gods. Okay? And it's not seen as a good thing. War is not seen as normal, which is why there are rituals around it. You can't just go to war. You have to have proper sacrifices and you might even have to sacrifice animals and read inside their entrails, like their intestines, to look for signs. If the gods say, yes, we can go to war, will we have success? You can't just go to war if you want to and go killing people. Even in a religious context, you need the permission of the gods. Okay. So what is my opinion? Well, I've been giving you my opinion, but let's get more specifically to my opinion. Is religion violent? And I would say no, and then I would say yes. And I'm not trying to hedge my bets here. I mean, but the question is more complex than that. You can't just give a simple yes or no answer, because yes, religion is violent at times. There is pure religious violence. But remember, we're talking about a concept. There is nothing in the concept of religion to indicate violence. If we... All right. If you remember the religion, or the definition I gave of religion, my own definition, which I'm still working on. It's not perfect. It's a work in progress, I should say. What is my definition? Religion is a concept for describing systems of beliefs and practices by which human beings interact with a non-human or non-natural reality that has ultimate existence and meaning. That's the definition I gave you. I would make some changes to that. I have made some changes on the PowerPoint when I teach this class again. Because I probably wouldn't include non-natural anymore, because there are nature gods and stuff, that gods and goddesses that are kind of part of nature, even though they're kind of separate. I might say supernatural instead. Maybe supernatural is the better word there. And I want to include transcendence, because I do think it's an important aspect. Nevertheless, that's my definition. But from what we learned about where the word religion comes from, how it's used in the modern day, it is a concept. It's an abstraction. It's something we take out from what we see. And I think it really exists. There really is this thing, religion. But like with anything we see really exist, when we want to study it and talk about it, we have to abstract in some way. We have to kind of suck out its essence in a way. And we come up with a concept we call religion, which no one really practices, but it's meant to represent all of the practices and the beliefs that we see out there that seem to come together as expressions of ultimate meaning and transcendence, which we can call religion. If we have to give it a word, let's give it the word religion. That seems to work. Okay? But in the word religion, and even in the definition of religion, no one seems to start from the fact that, well, religion is a violent system of religion is a system of violence that No, I mean, it's not embedded in the concept. There's nothing in the concept that indicates violence. Even the presence of religion does not usually indicate violence. You see a church, a temple, a synagogue, a shrine, a mosque. You see these buildings. Usually when people see them, they equate them with places of quiet, of silence, of prayer, of calmness, of peacefulness. Usually when someone sees, maybe that's because they're empty. No one's going to church. But anyways. But you don't associate necessarily like a synagogue as a place of violence where people are going to be violent. It's not like a karate school. You go to the kung fu or karate. Dojo is karate, right? Because it's Japanese. You go to the local dojo to kind of throw people around, and hit people. It's a place of violence. That you associate with violence. You go to a boxing club, a place where people are training to be boxers. You expect to see people getting punched in the face. It's not unusual. You don't go in and say, "Whoa! Man, that dude just knocked him out." Whoo! No one calls the police. You expect it. But if you went into a church and you see the priest haul off and go, "Whoa! Whoa!" Knocks me out, someone might be, "Well, that's assault. Call the cops." No priest should be doing that. Maybe, who knows? Maybe the priest is a boxer. Like Father Stu. Movie Father Stu. Which I will not watch because it has filthy language in it. So that's just me. Anyways, so these things they're usually associated with things that are the opposite of violence or violent activity. When you're involved in violence, especially think of warfare, not just the killing and the bloodshed. There's no peace. There's no quiet. You have bombs going off, people screaming, yelling, stuff like that, using foul language. It's chaotic. It's not orderly. It's exactly kind of like the opposite feel if you enter into a mosque or a shrine, a religious space. So no, though, do I want to put that in the next thing? Now, so no, I don't think the concept has violence within it. But yes, religion can be violent and is violent. Why? Because religion is more than a concept. I spoke about this a little bit before. It is anthropological. Remember when I talked about, aspects of religion? And I went through several aspects. Religion is. I got to go back and remember my own shtick. Well, the first thing I said, religion is anthropological. It's religion. Oh yeah, religion is not a religion of one. It involves a community. Religion involves rituals. Religion involves things that people do. It involves all sorts of things. One of the things that I mentioned was that it's anthropological, involves people. Yes, we can talk about religion as a concept, but people are where the rubber hits the road, as the saying goes. Okay, where the wheels hit the road. It's people. And since religion comes from humans, it is not something that is existing in some far-off conceptual world. It includes and requires human beings, us, to exist. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. Ooh, that's interesting. So that's why I wanted to say that. Well, it doesn't matter. I can move on. So human beings write scriptures. They write texts. They come up with practices. They come up with beliefs or outline beliefs. That may include violence, may include violent aspects, like we talked about the ancient Babylonians. But there's no religion without the human beings, even though they're talking about gods. Now, human beings might say, well, this comes from God, but it's still the human beings, like the Bible or something, which is a book that people will say, well, that comes from God. It is a revelation. But people still had to write it. God did not physically write every word of the Bible. Some parts he apparently did. There are parts of the Bible where it says God wrote these things down, but other times it's God told Moses to write stuff down, or told the prophet Jeremiah to hire a secretary so he can write down the revelations that I'm giving to you. But most of the times, no. People just decided, hey, I should write this down. I think this came from God, and I'm going to write it down for people. So you still need humans, even when gods are involved. So human beings, yes, if human beings are violent or can be violent, they bring their violence to the concept. So yes, I would say that religion can be, in a very real sense, can be violent as long as there are violent humans. Why is this the case? Now, I want to go back to a point that I wanted to make before, and I'll make it in this context. Religions do seem to prescribe or advocate or tell people to do violent activities. So, for example, think of circumcision in Judaism, where a male baby is brought and the foreskin of the baby's penis is cut off by a person. It's usually a person who has been trained to do this. The person has a special role in the Jewish community. And there are all sorts of, I'm not trained in it, so I don't know. But I just know that there is training involved, and there's all sorts of, it's almost like a medical procedure in a way. It's treated in that way. The instruments have to be clean, the person has to be licensed, and a person can't just show up and say, you're having, you're having your child, it's called a bris, not brief. You're having your child circumcised because he's a Jew. Okay, I'll do it. Not anyone can do that. Whereas in, say, other religions like Christianity, a baptism, like dunking a person in the water and saying the words, really anyone can do that to another person. As long as the person says the words and has the proper intention, it's a valid ceremony. Even if the person's an atheist, they could still do it because you're doing it for the other person. Judaism, no. You have to be specially trained to do circumcision. But it's an act of violence. There is the shedding of blood. There's the cutting of the flesh of this child. In Hinduism, you have not so much the sacrifice of animals, but there are sacrifices performed in Hindu temples. People will offer up, say, flowers and stuff like that to a god or a goddess, and they'll burn them. They'll burn them in fire and stuff like that as an offering. So that's a form of destruction. And this happens in some other religions as well, in places like Japan, where people will offer these paper, what do you call them, models of it's just weird stuff. I shouldn't say it's weird. I'm not trying to be judgmental. To me, it's weird because I'm an outsider. To them, it's not. But paper facsimiles of money, or a car, an automobile, or a house, or flowers, and these things are burned up and they're given over to the spirits of their ancestors, And to give them over, they will destroy them. They will burn them up. That's why they're made of paper, so they can be burned. And in the burning, it's kind of seen as a sacrifice that this, all of these material goods are now being given to your spiritual ancestors, the spirits, so that they can now enjoy them in the spiritual world. You're transforming them so they can be enjoyed in the spiritual world. I don't know why someone needs a Ferrari in the next life, but to me, I would just like a 1972 Chrysler Imperial LeBaron. Oh yeah, with cruise control. Because I just want to be able to sit there and drive. Don't want to have to just turn on the cruise control and coast along, baby. Anyways, but yeah, so if I'm ever dead and you want to do one of these things for me, make a big paper mache model of a 1972 Chrysler Imperial LeBaron and burn it up to give it to me, be my guest, baby. Well, maybe not that much. Anyway. So that happens. In Islam, you have the practice of ritualistic whipping. I can't go into the whole story of why certain Muslims will do this, but basically they're mourning. They're in the process of, they're whipping themselves because they're mourning the death of a certain Muslim leader from a long, long time ago. I believe, I always seem to get the two confused. There's Hussein and Hassan. And I want to say it's Hussein is the one who was killed. But it doesn't matter about the names. Anyways, there was a Muslim leader, famous to certain Muslims, who was killed a long, long time ago. These Muslims believe that his death was kind of like a martyrdom. It was kind of like a murder in a way. He died for his faith. And so at the beginning of the new year, the first month of the Islamic calendar, these Muslims will come together all across the world, in all parts of the world, and they will slap themselves and hit their heads and as signs of mourning for the death of this man. I want to say it's Hussein. But some of them go even farther. They take these big metal whips and they whip themselves bloody in the streets. And you see, I have pictures of it on my computer. I'm not going to show you, but because if we're a world religions course, I might show you, but not now. So they do these things. So that's violent. Even in Buddhism, you have violence, where there's a practice in Buddhism where they take a dead body and they cut it up into parts, and then they kind of wrap the parts up and they leave them out so that vultures and birds can eat them, can eat away at the body. I mean, there's a reason they're doing this. They're trying to show that really our human bodies are not a whole entity, that we're really just a composite of parts. We're not real. There's really no unit. I mean, again, this is not a world religions class, so I can't go into it. But really, there is no you that is in existence. That's an illusion. You're really just a bunch of parts that come together that you think exist as a unity. So to show that that's not true, once a person dies, in some forms of Buddhism, not all forms of Buddhism, they will cut up the body into parts and allow it to just be out there for the birds to eat it. That's a form of violence. After the fact, of course, the person's dead. But why are these things done? They're not done simply for the sake of violence, even though they are violent. They're not done just to hurt people. That's not the purpose. Okay? They're not condonations of violence, not condoning violence itself against others, but the activities are designed to bring the person into contact with that ultimate transcendent realm of existence that I talked about at the beginning of the course, which is religion is all about. It's about ultimacy and transcendence. People believe that there is a realm of existence, an area of existence that is ultimate meaning. It explains everything, and it is everything. It kind of encompasses everything. And that's what these practices are designed to do, to bring them into contact with that. So they're not necessarily violent per se, even if they are violent per se, I guess is what I'm saying. Why might we have a problem with human beings and violence and religion? I said before that human beings bring violence to the concept, okay? religion is violent as long as there are violent humans. Well, why? Well, humans have a fear of what we could call the other. Okay? We have fear of difference. Difference is weird to us. It can even be threatening because we don't, especially if we really don't know what it is and we want to stay away from it. But we can stay away from it, but we can also approach it and try to defend ourselves against it by destroying it if it's too weird. You know, if you belong to a group, your group should be honored and you treat your group favorably with favor, but not the other. Okay? The other, the outsider is to be treated suspiciously and as a threat, like, okay, who are you? You know, someone came into this classroom who is not part of the class, like one of the people here for the graduation just wandered in just because they were walking around. My thing would be like, you know, who are you? You know, what are you doing here? You're not part of our group. You are threatening to me. Not you, sir. You're perfectly okay. I have to be suspicious. So people can respond violently to that. And religion is kind of the same way. You're not part of my religion. What are you? Who are you? The question of is religion violent is easier to answer if you assume that religion comes primarily from humans. I mean, if we say that, well, humans are violent, therefore religion can be violent. So the answer is simpler. It's easier to come at. Okay, I might get to that, I might not. Oh, I was going to play that. Oh, yes. Okay, well, maybe I won't. Maybe I'll get to it next class, maybe not now. Anyways, religion is violent because humans are violent. So religion, in other words, it represents the violence that's apparent in human nature and in human relationships. Religion then becomes a tool for human violence. Okay, makes sense to me, I think. Not just because I wrote it, but because I think it makes sense. Okay? However, if you take religion seriously as coming from a supernatural source, if I take religion seriously as people believe that their religion comes from a god or comes from some ultimate supernatural revelation or source, then the answer becomes harder to answer. Or I should say, then it becomes a harder question to answer. The question becomes harder to answer. And this is where you have to say, it's harder to distance religion from violence itself. Why? Because in that case, the violent tendencies that are in human beings, I'm not denying that, but they no longer come from humans themselves. You're attributing this violence to a supernatural source. God, whatever. So you'll see that in the reading, when you do the reading from the book of Deuteronomy. Notice how often it talks about the Lord has told you to do these things. So to kill people, it says right there in black and white that there are certain groups of people that the Jews, the Israelites, are supposed to kill. Not just have nothing to do with, they're supposed to annihilate them so that they won't be contaminated by living near them. The Hivites, the Girgashites, the Jebusites, the Canaanites, etc. and so forth. There's a list of people that don't exist anymore, but the Jews were not supposed to have anything to do with them. They were supposed to kill them. Well, their God is telling them to do that. The violent tendency, you can't blame it on just, that's human nature, so religion is blameless here. No, it's the religion. Their God, their transcendent, the ultimate transcendent thing of meaning for them is telling them to do this, violence. Maybe it's true what I said at the beginning when discussing violence, that violence is just part of creation. Asteroids smash into each other, and things break apart and destroy other things. So maybe it's not surprising that even for the gods, the supernatural realities, violence is also a normal reality. It's just another power or force that has to be acknowledged. It's not something to be thought that you can really get away from it, even for God. Hinduism acknowledges this kind of nicely because, I guess I did. Well, I did do that. Okay, I'm not going to show that. Don't worry about these warning signs. If I go back to the beginning, yeah, there we go. The religion of India, Hinduism, kind of integrates this idea nicely because they just accept that violence is a part of the world. Okay, Judaism has a problem. Christianity has a problem. Maybe not so much Islam, but Islam has a problem too because their God is supposed to be a God of mercy and love. He's not by definition a violent God. That's not supposed to be part of God's nature. And yet you have this God commanding violence. So that becomes a problem. Hinduism, not so much. They've integrated violence. Violence is part of the world. I mean, Kali is extremely violent and vicious. She's an extremely violent goddess. You have to be careful with her. Because while, yes, she is also can be extremely good and loving and caring, she can also go nuts in violence. The creation of the world, there's this poem in one of their sacred books. This is not a world religions class, so I'm not going to get into it, but it's called The Hymn of the Cosmic Man. If you're curious, it's in a religious book called the Rig Veda, which is a group of hymns in Hinduism. And there's what's called the Hymn of the Cosmic Man, the Song of the Cosmic Man. What is the Rig Veda? Well, it's a bunch of hymns and songs to the gods that were used and are still used in Hindu worship and in the sacrificial rituals. Hindus don't perform sacrifices of animals anymore, but they used to. And in the performance of those sacrifices, you had to know which god it was proper to sing a hymn to and stuff like that. So the Rig Veda is a collection of all of these hundreds of hymns and songs to these various gods and goddesses. And they probably don't come, a lot of them probably don't come from India, actually, which is one of the interesting things about history. It's part of Hinduism, which is Indian religion, but actually it probably come from, I want to say Europeans, that's too simplified, but, they come from outside, from northern tribes that emigrated into the north of India and brought their religion with them. So you have this hymn of the cosmic man, and basically what the hymn is about is there's this image used. I mean, whether it's real, they think it's real or not, is another question. But just there's this image used of kind of like a kind of being who's like a man who is then chopped up into pieces, and from each piece, a part of the world is created. Okay, again, that's a violent image. The problem, so Hinduism seems to just accept the fact that there's violence and that's it. And there's even gods and goddesses that are violent and you just have to accept that. It might be even your dharma, your role in society, for example, as a warrior, to perform violence. And that's okay. They have no problem with that. In fact, that's what you're supposed to do if you're a warrior. If you're a soldier, you're supposed to be violent at times and to kill people. And that's perfectly legitimate. There's no guilt over it. In fact, to not do it, you would have guilt over that because you're not performing your dharma, your proper role. So the problem of violence really is more acute for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, where there's the claim that God is all good, all kind, all gentle, all peaceful. On the one hand, it works because in those religions, God is presented also as just. He rewards, but he punishes. He loves, but he also has to do violence sometimes. And that kind of makes sense because if someone does wrong, we expect violence. You expect punishment. Punishment is a form of violence. You expect it. But God is also completely loving and merciful. So does that mean he cannot be violent or use violence when it's necessary? Like, should he not then punish if he's all loving and all merciful? So it becomes a problem, say, for the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic belief systems. The question. So, all right, let me just check the time here. I want to make sure. Oh, okay, it's 7:49. Alrighty. I'm not going to get into that. All right, so I'm pretty much done. So I will finish for this evening. Have a good holiday, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you. You're welcome, sir. Have a good day. Have a good holiday. Thank you.